Hello everyone and welcome back to Cause for Conversation, a Solent Mind podcast where we talk about mental health and well-being, featuring expert guests from our services across Hampshire. 30th of March is World Bipolar Day, so today's episode is about raising awareness of bipolar and what it's like to live with bipolar. Our guest for this episode is Rebecca Wright, team lead at Solent Recovery College. Rebecca will be sharing her experiences of bipolar, but obviously everyone's experience is different. And there is a content warning on this episode for a suicide attempt mention. We don't go into detail, but please do look after yourselves when listening. At Solent Recovery College, students can learn practical skills for living with ongoing symptoms. Solent Recovery College will become part of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust from the 1st of April 2025. But obviously we recorded this episode a few weeks ago. My name's Jenna. I'll be your host here at Cause for Conversation, but I'm also Communications and Marketing Lead for Solent Mind, Hampshire's largest mental health charity. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And after this episode, why not leave us a comment or review, letting us know your experiences of bipolar or things that you found helpful. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thanks. Sure. My name is Rebecca Wright. I'm here because I have bipolar disorder, but as it happens, I also work for Solent Mind at the moment. I am the team lead at Solent Recovery College, and I promise not to put in too many plugs for my service. And I'm based on the University of Portsmouth because that's where we have our classes, and our classes are geared towards people who suffer from mental illness and their supporters. And we're open currently, everybody in Portsmouth, PO1 to PO6, everybody at the university, staff and students, and Solent Mind staff and NHS staff as well, although we'll be merging soon with the Recovery College, and we'll be creating a new, yet untitled, bigger college, and then everybody in all of Hampshire and Isle of Wight can come on our courses.
Brilliant. And what are some of the topics on those courses, Rebecca? What sort of things do people come and study?
That's a good question. The first thing people study, if they listen to us and do as we wish, is called What is Recovery, which simply defines sort of what recovery is. Spoiler alert, we define it as living a life worth living with or without ongoing symptoms. And that ties in, I think, really well with a lot of what I'll tell you about myself. And then people are interested often in our first steps for recovery classes, which are sort of the nuts and bolts of how to take care of yourself, food and mood, sleep better, balanced lifestyle, things like that. There's 7 of those. And then people often go next for what I think of as our diagnosis-based courses. So we have, for example, understanding depression, which is followed by a 3-part living with depression. And we have that same series running for personality disorder, for bipolar, for anxiety, for OCD. They don't all run every term, but, well, anxiety and depression do, because there's always a very, very popular, if that's the right word to use.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and your story with bipolar, please, if you wouldn't mind.
I will. What I'm going to do actually is share my story, and that's like with a capital S and in quotation marks. Because one of the things we do at the college is, not in every single class, but certainly in all the understanding level classes, all our courses are taught by 2 people. One of those people will be an AMH trainer, someone from adult mental health, typically from St. Mary's. And the other will be a peer trainer, someone with lived experience of mental illness. So I like to have the piece of paper in front of me. And it's not that I need to look at the piece of paper. It's that I want to look at it because it keeps me safe. If it's on a piece of paper, it's not quite so soul-bearing.
Yeah.
And my background is in theater, so what it reminds me of is I'm auditioning for a part. I'm auditioning for a part of this woman with this bizarre life story. And it's just, yeah, it's very real, but it does keep me safe. So that's how I'm going to do this. If we were in the classroom, I would be arranging a chair kind of in front of all the desks, and I walk around it and sit and stand. It's terribly dramatic.
I love it.
Here it is, though, in this version. I have bipolar disorder. I have bipolar disorder. Once upon a time, I would have said I am bipolar, but I am not my diagnosis. So I deliberately say have rather than am. Someday it may become a habit. I was diagnosed 27 years ago after the birth of my second child. Now, I'd first come into the wonderful world of mental health care 2 years before that when I had my first child in postpartum depression. But with my second, it was postpartum depression with added hallucinations. Shortly after I began taking these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRIs, always fun to say, I bounced up really high, which is why they decided to focus on that diagnosis of bipolar. So that's how I got the diagnosis. But when did it start? That is really hard to say. I have felt different all my life, believing from an early age that other people didn't experience emotions in the same way that I did. Other people seemed so remote from their emotions to me that I believed everyone else must be a robot put on earth by God to test me. I was very sensitive. I am very sensitive. You got to toughen up, people say. As one of my friends once said to another, you know how difficult she can be. That phrase still haunts me. With adolescence and then adulthood came promiscuity, shoplifting, self-indulgent poetry, a broken window and bloody knuckles, a suicide attempt, nightmares, insomnia, racing thoughts, bursts of rampant creativity, astonishing productivity, and many, many tears. For years, I trained and worked as an actress, which gave everyone a nice excuse for my heightened emotionality. After the diagnosis, nothing changed right away, except the meds. My first psychiatrist tried quite a few, but hypomania kept popping back up, though it was useful in some ways. I wrote my master's thesis in a single weekend. I wrote short fiction for my popular website, all while in the process of divorcing my first husband, raising 2 kids, and working full time. You could even say that hypomania is how I came to live in England. My current husband and I met when he left a comment on my website. I've been in England for 25 years now, and I've probably been able to work a little more than half of that time. 19 years ago, I had 2 more children, my twin boys. But if I look back over the past decade, I reckon I've had 5 major depressions, multiple hypomanic episodes, many mixed states, and 1 psychotic break, courtesy of discontinuing a particularly nasty medication. Now, don't get me wrong. Medication has saved my life, but I always felt as though it was all something being done to me. I had no control or influence. But that finally began to change around 15 years ago when I was lucky enough to have some cognitive behavior therapy, which seems to have been a turning point. Even if I didn't understand it all at once, I could see that I could have some influence over my own mental health. Then I took a course at Solent Recovery College and began reframing my mental health as a recovery journey. The techniques I've learned in those courses have been very helpful. I practice mindfulness, I've rebuilt routines, and I try not to overcommit. My family can be so supportive, but I still struggle even to know what I need, let alone how to ask for it. And I began my involvement as a peer trainer at Solent Recovery College in April 2014. In July 2019, I became the peer trainer coordinator for the college, and in 2022, I took on the role of team lead. I love working for something I believe in. It's liberating to have a job where having a mental health diagnosis is actually a requirement. I don't have to hide my diagnosis. I don't have to be my diagnosis. I can be as different as I like, just like everybody else.
I mean, I, and yeah, I can understand why you like to read it in the way that you do. I
Yeah.
think it feels impactful, and thank you for sharing that. What I thought was really interesting there as well, Rebecca, was you talking about not being your diagnosis. It's
Yeah.
not I am bipolar. So
Yeah.
is there anything else you'd like to sort of say on that?
People are often concerned about getting a diagnosis because they feel they can't get the treatment they need and get the help they need until they have that diagnosis. And of course, it's sometimes very difficult to get through the system to get a diagnosis. But the downside of that is that that label can reduce you, or people can use it to reduce you. I don't know. I think semantics are important. Word choice is important. Yeah, it's important to be a human first and all the other things second. So, I mean, if someone were to say, oh, you're bipolar, I probably wouldn't correct them. Well, I
Okay.
might if I was feeling a bit persnickety. But yeah, that's fine. That's their choice. But for me, it's a nice difference.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I suppose everybody's individual in that aspect. And
Hmm.
the other thing that struck me and what you said as well was about sort of taking ownership of your
Yes.
recovery and of your, whether you take medication or you engage in CBT. So would you agree that it's really important to take ownership on your recovery
Oh,
journey?
absolutely, absolutely. Well, your recovery journey or your life, if you're not in recovery journey for anything, I mean, taking that ownership and sort of, I say, steering the ship. I don't know where the naval analogy comes from all of a sudden, but just, yeah, being able to take it for yourself and make it work for you. If you expect people, this is sometimes when people come to see us, they're quite unwell. Um, And ideally, people are just a little bit further along when they come to see us. But, not always. If they're in need, particularly if they're on the wait list for 8 million things, we can take them right away. We'll do what we can. But they have this thing, oh, can you fix me? Can you fix me? And no, no, we can help you fix yourself. And that's, I think, the only way it really works. And that's probably true for lots of things beyond mental health and things allied with mental health, like substance and things like that. It's got to come from the person first.
Absolutely. And I think there's something quite empowering about taking ownership and saying,
Yes.
I want to engage with this, or I want to um try this, or I think, do you get that feedback? Do a lot of people feel empowered coming on these courses?
Yes, yes, I think they do. We get that quite a lot. The other one we get a whole lot is how nice it is to know that they're not alone.
Mm.
And that is, I mean, even people who might know a lot of the subject matter that we teach, if they find it impacts them in a personal way, to be able to share that experience with other people. I mean, not group therapy, but just being in the classroom, talking about things, even in an intellectual way, is very, it really helps people. I think that, yeah, taking ownership for yourself and finding others like you are the two biggest things, other than the actual, you know, learning that we teach.
Other than the practical sort
Yeah,
of tips
yeah,
and tools
yeah.
and
It's
things.
it's a lot of information, background information to the various diagnoses, but coping strategies. That's we're all about coping strategies.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but what does living with bipolar look like for you day to day? Obviously, everyone's different.
The thing about bipolar that's interesting, it's not so much a day-to-day thing. Bipolar is more about episodes than days. I'll go into more depth and make that a little clear a little bit later on. It's important to know that bipolar alone, there's lots of normal days, quote unquote, normal days in between episodes. And there can be years between, I think they can come frequently, all kinds of patterns. For me, it's not so much the bipolar diagnosis that day to day, it's the things in my personality that are sort of related to it. So that emotionality I talked about is a big one. Being emotionally resilient, if I'm unwell, that's a problem. I'll just mention recently, because, bipolar wasn't enough. I had another diagnosis laid on top of that, and that's traits of EUPD, emotionally unstable personality disorder. And
Mm.
I know quite a few people who have that same kind of dual diagnosis that I have, all come about in the last couple of years. It's quite interesting. And that's really all about timing and severity, I think. Bipolar is not constant, but when you have it, it's higher and lower. And EUPD is more up and down in the course of a single day, which is what I think a lot of people think bipolar is. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so there's that. One thing I want to say is, and this may be the biggest day-to-day thing that affects me about having bipolar, you become very suspicious of happiness. Am
Okay.
I happy because this is a good day? Or is it happy because I'm getting high? There's always that little voice saying, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure you're just happy? And I think the older I get, the more confident I am in making those decisions. But it wasn't always as clear as it is now. Yeah.
And what are some of the ways that you, I don't like saying manage those symptoms, but what are some of the coping skills or techniques that work better for you?
Well, in terms of sort of the things I do regularly all the time, um, preventative, I guess, you could say, or if not preventing, then minimizing the impact of an episode. Um, I mean, the medication's been really important to me, as I said in the story. Um, the thing about medication, obviously, it's everyone's choice whether they take it or not. But for those illnesses that they believe are caused or contributed to by brain chemistry, medication is especially important, and bipolar is one of those. So that's a must for me. I mentioned in the story that I do mindfulness, and I do mindfulness quite often, not every day, but most days. I teach it as well, which is quite lovely, because if you want to really know something, teach it. I mean, I talk to people if I'm noticing symptoms or anything. I talk to people about it, primarily my husband, my long-suffering husband. um, yeah, I've also got a wellness action plan, which will fit a lot when we talk about work, but it applies to my home life as well. And what that is basically, it's a document that asks me to list what I'm like when I'm well, what I'm like when I'm not well, what are the first signs of my becoming unwell, things like that. So, for example, when I'm starting to get high, I see colors differently. They're very bright, and they're just so if I start saying to my husband when we're out walking the dog, "Oh my God, look at the blue on that car. Isn't that gorgeous?" He's got a little mental tick, tick. Okay, there we go.
That self-awareness is so important, right? Like nobody knows your condition or who how you manage it better than you. So you can communicate that to others and say, I need more of this, or, on these days I might need something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that self-awareness it's what empowers you. We're talking about having influence over yourself, but also being able to communicate about yourself, to draw some lines, make up some plans, and do all that when you're well, so it's ready for when you're not.
Yeah, like a toolkit, right? Having things in your toolkit. Do you talk about that on the courses?
We do indeed. A couple of different ways. I mean, on the anxiety course, for example, we teach about the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding exercise. And that one's simply if you're feeling ungrounded or uncertain of where you are, or just really upset, you look around. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can feel, and 1 thing you can taste. We also talk about our self-soothe boxes. That comes up in our depression course, and also on our Skills for Life course, which is based on the skills taught in dialectical behavior therapy, particularly useful for EUPD, but really good for any place where you've got emotional deregulation. So people talk about what they bring in their self-soothe boxes. I've got like a big powder puff in mine, a candle that reminds me of my childhood because it smells like lime jello, and I grew up in the 70s, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, I really like that idea actually of having a box that evokes certain memories or feelings.
It's a good thing. I mean, I love it because it meant I got to go to the works and buy a new box. I love stationery. Yeah.
Brilliant. And what would your advice be perhaps to someone who was wanting to ask about reasonable adjustments, or, had come across the wellness action plan and wanted to start that conversation perhaps?
I think start with the end in mind. Imagine what it is you want to be able to accomplish and what tools you need to get you there. Let's say I wanted to have fewer days where I became emotionally upset because of, whatever bad thing happened. And so then you'd say, okay, that's what I want to be. What do I need to get me there? Oh, well, maybe I need to have a 5-minute chat after a difficult session with a student, or maybe I need to be able to just debrief. That's important too. I think that gets ignored. That debriefing is really important for anybody doing any kind of work that's at all mentally or emotionally taxing. I
Yeah.
don't know if I answered your question, but I have some ideas anyway.
No, you did. I think you were thinking about the end goal,
Mm.
and then what are some things that perhaps an employer or well anyone could put in place. It might be things that you can put in place yourself,
Yep.
but it's good for your colleagues or manager or partner, whoever, to know that you're doing those things or why
Yes.
you're doing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Otherwise, they'll just assume, well, not necessarily in our organization, but I know my daughter, for example, has not always communicated why she's doing certain self-protective things, and people then just think she's lazy or weird, but
Mm,
if she had explained that, if they had had a wellness action plan or something similar where she could explain, I'm doing this because this, it will benefit us all, then be a different outcome, I think.
yeah, I think there's something about normalizing those conversations as well,
Hmm.
normalizing talking about mental health. Obviously, we're quite lucky that where we work, it comes up every
You
day. Everyone
can't
will
get
talk
away
to
from
you.
it.
But I've definitely been at other places where that might not be the case. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think there is still a bit of work to be done around normalizing those conversations,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's no different than any other part of who you are.
And again, we've touched on this a little bit, but what do you do to manage your well-being, Rebecca?
Um, Creativity is a huge part of how I view myself. So I spend a lot of my spare time doing creative things. I've got an art journal that I'm working on at the moment. I draw Zentangles, which are a type of mindful doodling, but they're a little more purposeful than that. It's one of the things we teach in our mindfulness course. It reminds me of another one of the coping strategies, or actually more of a worldview change that we teach. Circle of influence. Have you heard of this?
No?
Okay. If you imagine, I'm holding up my fist, a little tiny fist, in the middle of a bunch of concentric circles, there's this little circle in the middle, and that is, think of an egg yolk. That egg yolk is the things that you control. And
Okay.
if you think about it really hard and honestly, there's not that many. There's a lot we don't control. But talk about the egg white, the next big circle, those are the things that we influence.
Mm,
Okay. And there's a lot of things that we influence. So the things we can't control at all, don't waste your thought on it. Focus on the influence. Okay. Um, and then spilling out of the circle of the egg, some other bits that are looking weird, and there's the extra circle and it's really messy and horrible. Those are the things that you cannot control or influence.
mm,
That zone in our anxiety courses, we teach as the permission not to worry. You can't do anything to those ones. So focus on the main part of the egg white is sort of our thing. And that comes without the eggs, which are an invention or an addition of Robin Sharman, my admin assistant, a brilliant trainer. That is one of the things that has totally changed the way I view the world. And the reason I like the type of painting I do is I don't control it because I'm pouring paint and tilting a canvas, but I can influence it. And so it
mm.
reminds me. And then I also don't get freaked out about the result. Like if I try to actually draw something deliberately, I'm inclined to, I'm not a very good drawer. Um, I get really cross and upset with myself, but the paint is it's about letting go.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. I totally resonate with that because I think that particularly as adults, we have so many shoulds, woulds, coulds, like rules
mhm.
and expectations that we put on ourselves. And so to do something that you either have no control over or something playful, right? Something that
Yes.
there's no expectation of the end result.
I can influence it by the way I tilt it,
Mm,
or if I add extra silicone in my paint or any other number of weird things you could do to it. But yeah, you're giving up that sense of control, which is very freeing.
But are there any myths about bipolar that you'd like to mention?
It is true that it's a serious diagnosis, and I mean serious mental illness, quote unquote. That's the label, and it will last a lifetime, pretty much. Pretty much, you may have fewer episodes or whatever, but you'll have that diagnosis. They're not going to say, "Oops, you're not bipolar anymore," but that doesn't mean that you can't live a life worth living. And that's, I guess, the myth I really want to bust. This idea that you're screwed for life. The goal for recovery, as I said before, and I'm happy to say it again because I think it's super important, is to live a life worth living with or without ongoing symptoms. So yeah, that's a big one. And then another one I would mention, not all moods that are experienced or displayed by somebody with bipolar are because of the bipolar. They can have moods, just regular moods like other people too.
That's really interesting because you said about having to trust feelings of happiness and higher mood and stuff. So yeah, I can imagine other people obviously become a little bit suspicious of when you're having a particularly good or particularly bad day.
Yeah.
And my last question, what would your advice be to someone who's recently been diagnosed with bipolar?
I'm surprised you can't guess what I will say. Come to the Recovery College. Take our Understanding Bipolar class. Take our Living with Bipolar class. If you're a reader, you like to read things, read up on it. Get some information. Talk to people.
Yeah, knowledge is power, right?
It is. It makes things less scary, I think, if you have some idea of what is going on.
Is there anything you wish you knew back then?
Right after my diagnosis, when I was doing all those wild things at once, with the power of hypomania, the high was just building and building and building because I didn't have perspective. So I'm glad I have the perspective now, and I have some skills, and probably more crucially than anything, I have good support. But as in a fact, no, I don't think there's anything. Facts and figures wouldn't have changed anything back then to me. But knowing more about the likely ups and downs and the ways I could calm myself would have been helpful.
Yeah, that's absolutely valid. And I think that part of the brilliant thing about peer support is getting to hear that from other people who might be a little bit further along in their recovery journey or have been diagnosed a longer time ago. No one's experience is going to be exactly the same as yours, but I think that hearing it from people who have been through something similar is so helpful, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for being a fabulous guest and sharing your story and your experiences. And yeah, just another cheeky plug for the Solent Recovery College.
Absolutely.
Our next episode will be released around Mental Health Awareness Week in May, and we'll be looking at the theme of community. Make sure to follow us or subscribe so you don't miss that one. We'd also love to hear your suggestions for future episodes. What mental health or well-being topics do you think we should talk about on Cause for Conversation? Let us know. I'm Jenna, and this has been Cause for Conversation, a mental health podcast from Solent Mind.